Should you learn more about yourself on this spiritual journey as a way to find your deeper, more authentic self? Or is the spiritual journey more about shedding identity? In this video, I'll try to disentangle this paradox a bit. Hello everyone, I'm Sonja, and this is Holiness Connection. In an intro video I did for this channel, I used Rumi's words from his poem about being a wanderer, a worshiper, a lover of leaving, and I said that all of those fit me, and I wondered if they fit you as well. So as you can see from different namings within that poem, and those are kind of roles or identities or ways to think about ourselves. But often the spiritual journey can feel much more like shedding layers, whether it's conditioning that we want to get rid of, or even these senses of roles that we play or identities that we have. So it's a bit of a paradox, really, because neither feel wrong, at least for me. Maybe each of us has a different tendency towards one or the other, more of the shedding or more of the finding the deeper authentic self. But for me, it's always been about both. So I'd like to try to disentangle a little bit of this paradox. I think paradoxes you can't ever fully disentangle, right? But I do have a few thoughts about them. And the number one thought is that it's important to keep in mind attachment to a particular role or identity. So I think it's good to ask yourself the question, are we using a new insight to hold on more tightly to an identity or box ourselves into it? Or are we using it as sort of a snapshot of the moment, of the part of the spiritual journey that we're on, that can be about change and growth the whole way along? So one example of this could be simply something like taking a personality test. I know the Enneagram is very popular right now. And so I've learned that I'm a 9, and there's that feeling of, oh yeah, that fits me perfectly. And you could almost entrench in more on your particular ways of being that you already have when you feel that sense of, it's almost like being seen, right? That sense of being seen, like, oh, this is what I am, and this fits me really well. However, with the Enneagram as well, it can be thought of as more of a growth journey. And I've even heard it said, I can't remember who said this, but it resonated with me, that you could think of yourself as really being all the different Enneagram numbers. However, how you are expressing in your current state is as one or the other of them. So there's always ways, I think, that we can gain insight and see what we're doing. It's like a really nice picture of what we're doing, where we can gain some insight into ourselves and maybe almost have an observer perspective when we learn something like that about ourselves, or we even embrace a new role or a new way of being. I think it's always important to remember that the journey is also about change, and so to not get attached to it. I think it's possible not to get attached to it while still gaining insight from it. The second way I have of thinking about this paradox has to do with stages of the spiritual journey. So not so much the insights like would be for learning something from a personality test or gaining other insight about ourselves, but more of the role or stage of a journey that we're in. For example, for me, in healing from trauma and PTSD, I went through a stage that I would call now a victimhood stage. And that's not a popular thing to talk about as a valid thing almost anymore in those exact words, because there's definitely the idea to not be a victim. There's definitely an importance to the word survivor, for example, and I'll get into why that's an important stage not to stay in a second here. But it was a stage that I needed to go through, partly because there hadn't been an original acknowledgement of, I was blaming myself and that kind of thing. So I needed to have that stage where I felt like it was okay to acknowledge that I'd been wrong. And so the importance, though, is to not stay in a stage forever. So if I had stayed in that stage, that would have been a problem, because I needed to move on to through the healing process, not get stuck in that stage. So that's just one example. There can be all kinds of, I think it's easiest maybe to see in some roles in our lives that we play, maybe as different parenting stages that we're at, for example. So the key isn't that we can't ever have a role that we're playing in life or a stage that we're in that's part of our growth. But the key is, again, not to get stuck in that stage. And I think that, as you go forward, sometimes we might feel like we integrate that particular role or stage and it comes along with us in a sense in an integrated way, or maybe we feel more like we shed it and it passed away. So either of those could be a way that we move forward. And finally, from the Advaita Vedanta tradition, I think it could be really interesting to try more of a an experience of not, well, let's call it non-identity, but I'll talk more about what I mean by that in a second. And I encourage you to look this up yourself. Do not come from this tradition, so I think you could use this in your own way. But if you really would like the original traditional way of doing this, I would look up about it from the Advaita Vedanta tradition. And this is called the meditation neti neti neti, which means not this, not that. And so the idea would be to apply this to yourself and saying, so you're essentially saying, I'm not this, I'm not that. And you keep taking it further and further and further. And then it gives you this sense of more of a, let's say, non-identity. So somebody might experience it more as a sense of emptiness. I've also experienced it as a sense of expanded awareness as well. But it's sort of a helpful thing in terms of shedding any particular identities that we may have. But again, I think it's not necessarily that we would stay in that state, but it's being open to experiencing that can be helpful. Maybe for not having as much of that attachment to some of those roles and identities, so that they can be more a part of our whole process rather than an endpoint or a way that we don't change. So hopefully those are some interesting ways that you can think of to approach this paradox of learning more about our deeper authentic selves, and also at the same time being able to shed different layers and identities and roles. Let me know in the comments if you sort of sway one way or the other on the shedding of identities and roles, or if you've gained a lot of insight and that's been really helpful to you along the way. I'd love to hear about it. And please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.